Hey guys, Possible here. I got the chance today to see Peregrine's Home for the Peculiar Children, and I'm really impressed with what Tim Burton's managed to do with this film. I really enjoyed it. Actually, right now I'm feeling like I want to go back and see it again, and that's in fact what I intend to do. What I found though, what impressed me most is that typically in a lot of films that involve like children and supernatural sort of elements, it tends to just sort of, like young adult, they stick the protagonist, a fish out of water, gets spun into the middle of the supernatural elements really quickly, and instead it actually sort of builds up to it. It hints at those elements at first, and then eventually it becomes very obvious as soon as they hit whales. Now this review will contain spoilers, so we're not quite letting that out right now, but it's kind of hard to really talk about what I really liked about this film without actually mentioning what happened. So if you haven't seen the film yet, I think it's been out for a while in the States. For me, I've only just got the chance to see it. Go ahead and watch it. It's really good. It's worth it. I would say at first viewing, 8 out of 10. Definitely 8 out of 10. Anyway, once it gets back to that point, when it gets to whales and what are essentially time loops, it's revealed that these children that have abilities are looked after by Imbrans. I think that's how you pronounce it, Imbrans. And Peregrine is one of these Imbrans who has the ability to turn back time into a fixed point and create these loops, which help to protect these children from outside forces or people that would intend to harm them. I personally found that particular element of the film. Now, it is based on a book that is an adaptation of by the novel by Ransom Riggs, but at least I'd like to understand exactly the nature of this. Why is it that these Imbrans exist? How they come to exist? Is it just a pure chance of luck that these individuals are born with it? Are they the other way around? And why are they in charge of the children? And are they like a community? How does that work? And what's the point of it constantly, apart from these crazy, which eventually you'll get to later, but apart from these antagonists, these holocausts, these are probably the only ones I've encountered that would be in that realm. It does, based on what I've noticed, the Holocaust is a Holocaust, so it's definitely alluding to the actions of the Nazis and the Holocaust committed against the Jews. So even with Abe played by Terence Stamp, you might remember him from a really crappy film that a lot of reviewers talk about, The Haunted House with Eddie Murphy. I found that this particular element was sort of underplayed, but it did harken sort of, I guess, that such people that do these things to people that are different are monsters. I think that's the attitude here. I wouldn't have mind, though, that the antagonists were a bit more prevalent in the earlier parts of the movie. The problem is that you don't even see... the major villain, the Baron, one of these Holocausts, is really further back in the film, probably quite close to the second act. The end of the second act, he pops up and reveals himself. Trouble is that the Holocaust were a former peculiar children, I think, at some point, and they have abilities of their own. But this particular one, the Baron, played by Samuel L. Jackson, had the ability to shapeshift. So he's played by these by other actors and actresses, in fact. You don't really get a sense of what he's about, except for that he has a bit of a god complex, and he's seeking immortality by using some sort of machine that exploits the Imbran's ability to create time loops. And I guess to put a time loop on themselves, perhaps. I think that's the implication. But for some reason it went wrong, and it turned them into these weird monsters that can only gain their human form by eating the eyes of peculiar or supernaturally gifted children. And it would have helped to give them a bit more context, to give them more development, in my opinion. But at best, at least the slow burning sort of effect didn't feel nearly as cliched. But as you get through, you find yourself thinking, well, the main lead, Jacob or Jake, played by Asa Butterfield, you get the feeling that he's going to be torn between wanting to stay with the children and Peregrine and returning to his former life. I was hoping that wouldn't turn out so cliched, but either way, it's going to end up whether it be the more he learned a valuable lesson and moved on with his life, or whether he stuck it out. Well, he sticks it out with them, and given that there is 2 other novels, hopefully we'll look forward to seeing a bit more and understand these antagonists, the Holocaust. But when it comes to the cliches, though, it's very predictable. I want to say that I wish that he played it a little bit better than that, but Tim Burton still, at least, he has this amazing ability to sort of combine seemingly innocent elements together with dark and sort of even more adult themes. And given the context of the film, I probably wouldn't take any children to it. I wouldn't say so. I don't personally think it's that scary, but he certainly has the knack for bringing the innocence to get with the darker elements of life, or at least darker themes. He's always been like he's famous for it, and for the most part, that element that he brings to the story sort of overrides any of my concerns when it comes to cliches and things that have been done before, and I find myself really enjoying the film. I thought it was just going to be like a generic sort of kids flick and have very little to offer someone who's in his mid-20s and he's already a law student. Well, no, I really enjoyed it, despite I think that more people should have been seeing this film. I was sitting in a film of fielding maybe 6 to 8, 9 people. I thought this was the kind of film that needed a room stock full of people, and not unlike like Ghostbusters, which actually no, that's right. It had the same number of people, and it was this terrible subpar comedy. This, however, had a good mix of especially Eva Green's talents, who plays Peregrine. I've always loved her ability to add this sort of eccentric but kind of witty characteristic to all the characters she's played. It is, in a sense, something she's, I suppose, a caricature of her acting ability, but at the same time, for me, it becomes, in its own right, entertaining every time I see it, and no matter where I see it. And I really like her character, and I'd like to see more of her and understand her motivations behind it. But at first glance and seeing this film, she plays a very sort of motherly figure to the children, and is very protective of them, and will put herself before very, very obvious sort of what you would expect for someone who's took on this never-ending job of protecting these children from people that would intend to hurt them. Now, the only other thing I have to say is that I would like to know exactly what triggered all this I'll probably never learn any of this, but why? Why is there a certain group of individuals who are born with extraordinary abilities? What originally triggered certain people that had the ability to create fixed loops? I can understand, certainly, it's very much like X-Men, just in the characters, in what they're up against, which is adversity due to prejudice and bigotry. Although, of course, the antagonists themselves, while they harken back to very obvious people were very bigoted and very evil, I don't really see any of that in them, apart from name and the idea of monsters and referring back to the period of history, which was World War II and the Nazis and the horrible, disgusting things they did back then. I don't really see that in that. But like I said, the antagonists are just not really fleshed out, and they don't really seem to set that. I think that's the problem. Whether this is a problem with the source material or the screenplay, I don't feel that they really represent that element clearly enough, and in that they were basically peculiar children themselves, but they were grown up for one, and were obsessed with power and at least to live forever. I suppose that they don't want to remain children forever, but they want to also remain adults forever, young, and well, I just don't see how that's got anything to do with bigotry. It's a bit lackluster. If you're going to have that kind of theme and a point to it, then maybe you should make it more than just an arbitrary, monstrous figure. It doesn't really reference it in a way, but doesn't really emphasize what would be important behind a message like that. So Why aren't they? What's their motivation? It's just a bit lackluster, and given what I've seen, how a bit shallow it all is eh. And that's why I don't feel it's certainly a 10 out of 10 or a 9 out of 10. It's very... I might be being generous because I love the themes. It has the usual, like the love interest play, or Emma Bloom, the character who has... Oh, not Emma Bloom. Emma Bloom, who's played by Ella Pumwell. She's essentially this girl who is light in the air, and she has to wear these leaded boots, otherwise she would float away, and has the ability to also manipulate air and create air bubbles. And she apparently had a relationship with Abe, he's Jake's grandfather, but due to age and the fact that he didn't remain in the loop, eventually he just went on with his life and had children of his own with another woman, and eventually led up to Jake. Now Jake, in turn, ends up falling in love with or attracted to Emma Bloom. Now, it's a very standard issue, but at least it's got some character to it, and it's done well enough. You won't see anything particularly new. It is, to some extent, by the numbers, but it's the way that it is done. It's done in such a way that you find yourself not worrying too much about the cliches or the lackluster motivations for the antagonists or their lack of screen time. And I suppose that's a great thing because it focuses more on telling a story well enough that it's entertaining to watch. And I look forward to seeing a bit more, maybe in the later stories and sequels, if that's what they decide to do. I think it's definitely gone beyond its what they paid to actually produce the film in the first place, like whether it actually counts for marketing. I suppose I didn't see a lot of marketing for the film, so maybe there's hope for it. And since there is 2 other books that they've got to actually write along, hopefully we'll learn something a bit more. Maybe I can check out the books myself and learn a bit more of what's going to happen and why that they're doing this, and if there's a bit more of a stronger connection to this the reference to the Nazis, apart from just the time loop that Jake originally finds the children in the 1940s. I hope so, because I think that they've got a lot of great elements to the film, and I'd love to see a bit more depth to the characters and the antagonists involved. I love some of the action scenes. I love that. I had for a second there, though, I thought that one of the children was actually what was responsible for it, because he has this ability to animate the dead, or reanimate the dead or inanimate objects by, he has just places a heart and part of a brain, I think, into these different areas of models or skeletons, and he can give them life, at least temporarily. I believe his character was, Enoch O'Connor, and he has this dark look, like the stereotypical character you'd find in Tim Burton film, this dark sort of look to him. I always thought there was going to be like a love triangle between Jake, Emma and Enoch, but as it turns out, the one that's in the background, Olivia, who is a prior kinetic with the ability to start fires, and apparently if she doesn't wear these gloves, it'll start fires everywhere. In fact, it's actually a love interest between those two. So at least in some way, it was done well enough to throw you off. That I thought it was going to be something like that, given how little I saw of the antagonist so early on in the film. I see this weird kid who's giving me creepy vibes, and maybe he's the villain of the pick, but no, it's actually the Samuel L. Jackson. Now, I didn't know anything about this film going in. I went in completely blind. I wasn't really aware that even Samuel L. Jackson was going to be in this. He does a good job. I would say that he's such an experienced and renowned actor at this point that I think he could play almost anything. Almost. With maybe the exception of the Star Wars prequels. I think no one could ever get anyone interested in that crap. But apart from that, I would say that I wouldn't expect anything else. It does have that sort of stereotypical, they make a song and sell it to sort of audience. The music isn't terrible, but it isn't anything I consider memorable. Usually I find myself loving a lot of these film soundtracks. I was very disappointed by another film, Suicide Squad's soundtrack. I was trying to see, there was versions of like the VA soundtracks that were in the film that didn't exist in either version that I bought. So, thanks. Okay. But in here, there's absolutely nothing particularly memorable, but it serves the purpose, I guess. But nothing particularly memorable. Well, that's all I have to say about it. I think it's well worth your money and your time. I think it's a film you should see and support. I want to see more of these characters. I actually really enjoyed what I thought was just going to be a standard issue kids flick. Actually turned out to be something I can really get behind, and I hope that in the future we learn a bit more substance to the Holocaust. Yeah, really. And learn a bit more about the characters, and hopefully give a bit more depth to the protagonists in the class itself. I will say though, just a little bit, that the majority of the children themselves are very given almost nothing apart from their ability, and maybe some fairly expected. Oh, we want you to be here, please stay, Jake. Come on. Anyway, that's me, Possible. I'll see you guys on the next one.